Thank you for joining us this evening for Episode 7 of The Unpleasant Profession of Jonathan Hoag, a science fantasy novella by American writer Robert A. Heinlein. In our last episode, Cynthia and Randall made a visit to Dr. Potbury. He warned them to stay away from Hoag. Once home, Cynthia napped and Randall went out. On his return, he found a large mirror had been delivered and installed in their bedroom. Later that evening, Randall awoke to find Cynthia missing and Phipps insisting he come through the mirror again. Teddy and Cynthia found themselves on the boardroom table of Detheridge Co Jewellers, unable to move. Teddy was given an ultimatum involving Cynthia's life and death. However, there is a fine line between dreams and reality. When Teddy awakens, he does not consciously acknowledge the terror of the situation. In tonight's episode, we are left with the question, where do we find, in what reality, are Teddy and Cynthia?
He was in a small room, every side of which was a mirror, 4 walls, floor, and ceiling. Endlessly, he was repeated in every direction, and every image was himself, selves that hated him, but from which there was no escape. "Hit him again," they yelled. He yelled and struck himself in the teeth with his closed fist. He cackled.
They were closing in on me, and I could not run fast enough. My muscles would not obey me, no matter how urgently I tried. It was because I was handcuffed to that treadmill they had put me on. I was blindfolded too, and the handcuffs kept me from reaching my eyes. But I had to keep on. Cynthia was at the top of the climb. I had to reach her.
Only, of course, there is no top when you are on a treadmill.
I was terribly tired, but every time I slowed the least little bit, they hit me again. And I was required to count the steps too, else I got no credit for it. 10,091, 10,092, 10,093, up and down, up and down. If I could only see where I was going.
He stumbled. They clipped him from behind, and he fell forward on his face. When he woke, his face was pressed up against something hard and lumpy and cold. He shifted away from it and found that his whole body was stiff. His feet did not work as they should. He investigated by the uncertain light from the window and found that he had dragged the sheet half off the bed and had it tangled around his ankles. The hard, cold object was the steam radiator. He had been huddled in a heap against it. He was beginning to regain his orientation. He was in his own familiar bedroom.
I must have walked in my sleep. I hadn't pulled that since I was a kid. Walking in my sleep, tripped and smashed my head into the radiator, knocked myself silly, colder in a coot. Damn lucky I hadn't killed myself.
He was beginning to pull himself together and to crawl painfully to his feet when he noticed the one unfamiliar thing in the room, the new big mirror. It brought the rest of his dream back with a rush. He leaped toward the bed.
"Cynthia!"
But she was there where she belonged, safe and unharmed.
She had not awakened at my outcry, of which I was glad. I did not want to frighten her.
He tiptoed away from the bed and let himself quietly into the bathroom, closing the door behind him before he turned on the light.
A pretty sight. My nose had been bloodied. It had long since stopped bleeding. The blood had congealed. It made a gory mess of the front of my pajama jacket. Besides that, I had apparently lain with the right side of my face in the stuff. It had dried on, messily, making me appear much more damaged than I was, as I discovered when I bathed my face. Actually, I did not seem to be much damaged, except that, wow, the whole right side of my body was stiff and sore. Probably banged it and wrenched it when I fell, then caught cold in it.
He wondered how long he had been out. He took off the jacket, decided that it would be too much effort to try to wash it out then, rolled it into a ball and chucked it behind the toilet. He didn't want Sin to see it until he had had a chance to explain to her what happened.
Why, Teddy, what in the world have you done to yourself? Nothing, kid. Nothing at all. Just ran into a radiator.
That sounded worse than the old one about running into a door. He was still groggy, groggier than he had thought. He had almost pitched on his head when he threw the jacket down, had been forced to steady himself by grabbing the top of the tank.
And my head was pounding like a Salvation Army drum. I fiddled around in the medicine cabinet, located some aspirin, and took 3 tablets, then looked thoughtfully at a prescription box of Amatol Cynthia had obtained some months before. I had never needed anything of the sort before. I slept soundly, but this was a special case. Nightmares, 2 nights running, and now sleepwalking, and damn near breaking my silly neck.
He took one of the capsules, thinking as he did so that the kid had something when she thought they needed a vacation. He felt all shot. Clean pajamas were too hard to find without turning on the bedroom light.
I slipped into bed, waited a moment to see if Sin would stir, then closed my eyes and tried to relax.
Inside of a few minutes, the drugs began to take hold. The throbbing in his head eased up, and soon he was sound asleep. He hadn't killed himself. Chapter 7. Sunlight in his face woke him up. He focused one eye on the clock on the dressing table and saw that it was past 9 o'clock, whereupon he got out of bed hastily. It was, he found, not quite a bright thing to do. His right side gave him fits. Then he saw the brown stain under the radiator and recalled his accident.
Cautiously, I turned my head and took a look at my wife. She was still sleeping quietly, showing no disposition to stir. That suited me. It would be better to tell her what had happened after I had dosed her with orange juice. No point in scaring the kid.
He groped on his slippers, then hung his bathrobe around him, as his bare shoulders felt cold and the muscles were sore. His mouth tasted better after he had brushed his teeth. Breakfast began to seem like a good idea. His mind dwelt absent-mindedly on the past night, fingering his recollections rather than grasping them.
These nightmares,
He thought as he squeezed the oranges.
not so good. Maybe not crazy, but definitely not so good. Neurotic. Got to put a stop to them. Man couldn't work if he spent the night chasing butterflies, even if he didn't fall over his feet and break his neck. Man had to have sleep, definitely.
He drank his own glass of juice, then carried the other into the bedroom.
Come on, Bright Eyes, reveille.
When she did not stir at once, he began to sing.
Up with the buttercup, come on, get up, get up. Here comes the sun.
She did not budge.
I set the glass carefully on the bedside table, sat down on the edge of the bed, and took her by the shoulder.
Wake up, kid. They're moving hell. 2 loads have gone by already.
She did not move. Her shoulder was cold.
Sin? Sin? Sin?
He shook her violently. She flopped lifelessly. He shook her again.
Sin, darling. Oh, God.
Presently, the shock itself steadied him. He blew his fuses, so to speak, and was ready, with a sort of ashy, dead calmness, to do whatever might be necessary. He was convinced, without knowing why, nor yet fully appreciating it, that she was dead. But he set about making sure by such means as he knew.
I could not find her pulse. Perhaps I was too clumsy, or perhaps it was too weak. All the while, a chorus in the back of my mind shouted, "She's dead, 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 and you let her die."
He placed an ear over her heart. It seemed that he could hear her heart beat, but he could not be sure. It might have been only the pounding of his own. He gave up presently and looked around for a small mirror. He found what he wanted in Cynthia's handbag, a little makeup glass. He polished it carefully on the sleeve of his robe and held it to her half-open mouth. It fogged faintly. He took it away in a bemused fashion, not letting himself hope, polished it again, and put it back to her mouth. Again it fogged, lightly but definitely.
She was alive. She was alive.
He wondered a moment later why he could not see her clearly, and discovered that his face was wet.
I wiped my eyes and went on with what I had to do. There was the needle business. If I could find a needle. I did find one in a pincushion on her dressing table. I brought it back to the bed, took a pinch of skin on her forearm. "Excuse me, kid," and jabbed it in.
The puncture showed a drop of blood, then closed at once, alive. He wished for a fever thermometer, but they had none. They were both too healthy. But he did remember something he had read somewhere, something about the invention of the stethoscope. He rolled up a piece of paper.
I found one of suitable size and rolled it into a 1-inch tube, which I pushed against the bare skin just over her heart. I put my ear to the other end and listened.
Lub-a-dub, 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 lub-a-dub. Faint, but steady and strong. No doubt about it this time, she was alive. Her heart was beating. He had to sit down for a moment. Randall forced himself to consider what to do next.
Call a doctor? Obviously. When people were sick, you called a doctor. I had not thought of it up to this time because Sin and I just never did, never needed to. I could not recall that either one of us had had an occasion to do so since we had been married. Call the police and ask for an ambulance, maybe? No, I'd get some police surgeon more used to crash cases and shootings than anything like this. I wanted the best, but who? We didn't have a family physician. There was Smiles, a rum dump, no good, and Hartwick. Hell, Hartwick specialized in very private operations for society people.
He picked up the phone book.
Potbury. I didn't know anything about that old geezer, but he looked competent.
He looked up the number, misdialed it 3 times, then got the operator to call it for him.
Yes, this is Potbury. What do you want? Speak up, man.
I said this is Randall. 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 My wife and I came to see you yesterday, remember? About
Yes, I remember. What is it?
my wife is sick.
What's the trouble? Did she faint again?
No, yes, that is, she's unconscious. She woke up unconscious. I mean, she never did wake up. She's unconscious now. She looks like she's dead.
Is she?
I don't think so, but she's awful bad off, doctor. I'm scared. Can you come over right away?
There was a short silence.
I'll be over.
Oh, good. Look, what should I do before you get here?
Don't do anything. Don't touch her. I'll be right over.
He hung up. Randall put the phone down and hurried back to the bedroom. Cynthia was just the same. He started to touch her, recalled the doctor's instructions, and straightened up with a jerk. But his eye fell on the piece of paper from which he had improvised a stethoscope, and he could not resist the temptation to check up on his earlier results. The tube gave back a cheering lub-a-dub. He took it away at once and put it down.
10 minutes of standing and looking at her with nothing more constructive to do than biting my nails left me too nervous to continue the occupation. I went out to the kitchen and removed a bottle of rye from the top shelf, from which I poured a generous 3 fingers into a water glass. I looked at the amber stuff for a moment, then poured it down the sink and went back into the bedroom. She was still the same. It suddenly occurred to me that if I had not given Potbury the address, I dashed in the kitchen and snatched the phone. Controlling myself, I managed to dial the number correctly. A girl answered the phone.
No, the doctor isn't in the office. Any message?
My name is Randall.
Oh, Mr. Randall, the doctor left for your home about 15 minutes ago. He should be there any minute now.
But he doesn't have my address.
What? Oh, I'm sure he has. If he didn't have, he would have telephoned me by now.
He put the phone down. It was damn funny. Well, he would give Potbury 3 more minutes, then try another one. The house phone buzzed. He was up out of his chair like a punch-drunk welterweight.
Yes?
Potbury, that's you, Randall?
Yes. Come on up.
He punched the door release as he spoke. Randall was waiting with the door open when Potbury arrived.
Come in, doctor. Come in.
Potbury nodded and brushed on by him.
Where's the patient?
In here.
Randall conducted him with nervous haste into the bedroom and leaned over the other side of the bed while Potbury took his first look at the unconscious woman.
How is she? Will she be all right? Tell me, doctor.
Potbury straightened up a little, grunting as he did so.
If you will kindly stand away from the bed and quit crowding me, perhaps we will find out.
Oh, sorry.
Randall retreated to the doorway. Potbury took his stethoscope from his bag, listened for a while with an inscrutable expression on his face, which Randall tried vainly to read, shifted the instrument around, and listened again. Presently, he put the stethoscope back in the bag, and Randall stepped forward eagerly. But Potbury ignored him. He peeled up an eyelid with his thumb and examined her pupil, lifted an arm so that it swung free over the side of the bed, and tapped it near the elbow, then straightened himself up and just looked at her for several minutes. Randall wanted to scream. Potbury performed several more of the strange, almost ritualistic things physicians do, some of which Randall thought he understood, others which he definitely did not.
What did she do yesterday after you left my office?
Randall told him. Potbury nodded sagely.
That's what I expected. It all dates back to the shock she had in the morning. All your fault, if I may say so.
My fault, doctor?
You were warned. Should never have let her get close to a man like that.
But you didn't warn me until after he had frightened her.
Potbury seemed a little vexed at this.
Perhaps not. Thought you told me someone had warned you before I did. Should know better anyhow with a creature like that.
Randall dropped the matter.
But how is she, doctor? Will she get well? She will, won't she?
You've got a very sick woman on your hands, Mr. Randall.
Yes, I know she is. But what's the matter with her?
Lethargia gravis, brought on by psychic drama.
Is that serious?
Quite serious enough. If you take proper care of her, I expect she will pull through.
Anything, doctor, anything. Money's no object. What do we do now? Take her to a hospital?
Potbury brushed the suggestion aside.
Worst thing in the world for her. If she wakes up in strange surroundings, she may go off again. Keep her here. Can you arrange your affairs so as to watch her yourself?
You bet I can.
Then do so. Stay with her night and day. If she wakes up, the most favorable condition will be for her to find herself in her own bed, with you awake and near her.
Oughtn't she to have a nurse?
I wouldn't say so. There isn't much that can be done for her, except to keep her covered up warm. You might keep her feet a little higher than her head. Put a couple books under each of the lower feet of the bed.
Right away.
If this condition persists for more than a week or so, we'll have to see about glucose injections or something of the sort.
Potbury stooped over, closed his bag, and picked it up.
Telephone me if there's any change in her condition.
I will.
Randall stopped suddenly. The doctor's last remark reminded him of something he had forgotten.
Doctor, how did you find your way over here?
Potbury looked startled.
What do you mean? This place isn't hard to find.
But I didn't give you the address.
Huh? Nonsense.
But I didn't. I remembered the oversight just a few minutes later and called your office back, but you had already left.
I didn't say you gave it to me today. You gave it to me yesterday.
Randall thought it over. He had offered Potbury his credentials the day before, but they contained only his business address. True, his home telephone was listed, but it was listed simply as a night business number. without address, both in his credentials and in the phone book. Perhaps Cynthia. But he could not ask Cynthia, and the thought of her drove minor considerations out of his mind.
Are you sure there is nothing else I should do, Doctor?
Nothing. Stay here and watch her.
I will, but I surely wish I were twins for a while.
Why?
Potbury gathered up his gloves and turned toward the door.
That guy Hoag, I've got a score to settle with him. Never mind. I'll put somebody else on his tail until I have a chance to settle his hash myself.
Potbury had wheeled around and was looking at him ominously.
You'll do nothing of the sort. Your place is here.
Sure. But I want to keep him on ice. One of these days, I'm going to take him apart to see what makes him tick.
Young man, I want you to promise me that you will have nothing to do in any way with this man you mentioned.
Randall glanced toward the bed.
In view of what has happened, do you think I'm going to let him get away scot-free?
In the name of, look, I'm older than you are, and I've learned to expect silliness and stupidity. Still, how much does it take to teach you that some things are too dangerous to monkey with?
He gestured toward Cynthia.
How can you expect me to be responsible for her recovery if you insist on doing things that might bring on a catastrophe?
But listen, Dr. Potbury, I told you that I intended to follow your instructions about her, but I'm not going to just forget what he has done. If she dies, so help me, I'll take him apart with a rusty axe.
Potbury did not answer at once. When he did, all he said was,
And if she doesn't die?
If she doesn't die, my first business is here taking care of her. But don't expect me to promise to forget Hoag. I won't, and that's final.
Potbury jammed his hat on his head.
Well, let it go at that, and trust she doesn't die. But let me tell you, young man, you're a fool.
He stomped out of the apartment. The lift he had gotten from tangling wills with Potbury wore off in a few minutes after the doctor had gone, and a black depression settled down on him. There was nothing to do, nothing to distract his mind from the aching apprehension he felt over Cynthia. He did make the arrangements to raise the foot of the bed, a little as suggested by Potbury, but it takes only a few minutes to perform such a trifling chore. When it was done, he had nothing to occupy him.
In raising the foot of the bed, I had been very cautious at first to avoid jarring the bed for fear of waking her. Then I realized that waking her was just what I wanted most to do. Nevertheless, I could not bring myself to be rough and noisy about it. She looked so helpless lying there.
He pulled a chair up close to the bed where he could touch one of her hands and watch her closely for any change. By holding rigidly still, he found that he could just perceive the rise and fall of her breast. It reassured him a little. He spent a long time watching for it. The slow, unnoticeable intake, the much quicker spilling of the breath.
Her face was pale and frighteningly deathlike, but beautiful. It wrung my heart to look at her. So fragile. She had trusted me so completely. And now there was nothing I could do for her. If I had listened to her, if I had only listened to what she had said, this would not have happened to her. She had been afraid, but she had done what I asked her to do. Even the sons of the bird had not been able to frighten her. What am I saying? Get a grip on yourself, Ed. That didn't happen. That was part of your nightmare. Still, if anything like that had happened, that was just what she would do. Stick in there and back up my play, no matter how badly things were going.
He got a certain melancholy satisfaction out of the idea that, even in his dreams, he was sure of her courage and her devotion to him. Guts, more than most men. There was the time she knocked the acid bottle out of the hands of that crazy old biddy he had caught out in the Midwell case. If she hadn't been quick and courageous then, he would probably be wearing smoked glasses now, with a dog to lead him around.
I displaced the covers a little and looked at the scar on her arm she had picked up that day. None of the acid had touched me, but some had touched her. It still showed. It always would show. But she didn't seem to care.
Cynthia. Oh, Sid, my darling.
There came a time when even he could not remain in one position any longer. Painfully, the cold he had caught in his muscles after the accident last night made his cramped legs ache like fury. He got himself up and prepared to cope with necessities. The thought of food was repugnant, but he knew that he had to feed himself if he were to be strong enough to accomplish the watching and waiting that was going to be necessary. Rummaging through the kitchen shelves and the icebox turned up some oddments of food, breakfast things, a few canned goods, staples, some tired lettuce. He had no stomach for involved cooking. A can of soup seemed as good a bet as anything. He opened a can of Scotch broth, dumped it into a saucepan, and added water. When it had simmered for a few minutes, he took it off the fire and ate it from the pan, standing up. It tasted like stewed cardboard. He went back to the bedroom and sat down again to resume the endless watching. But it soon developed that his feelings with respect to food were sounder than his logic. He bolted hastily for the bathroom and was very sick for a few minutes. Then he washed his face, rinsed out his mouth, and came back to his chair, weak and pale, but feeling sound enough physically. It began to grow dusky outside. He switched on the dressing table lamp, shaded it so that it would not shine directly in her eyes, and again sat down. She was unchanged. The telephone rang. It startled him almost out of rational response. He and his sorrow had been sitting there watching for so long that he had hardly was aware that there could be anything else in the world. But he pulled himself together and answered it.
Hello? Yes, this is Randall speaking.
Mr. Randall, I've had time to think it over, and I feel that I owe you an apology and an explanation.
Owe me what? Who is this speaking?
Why, this is Jonathan Hoag, Mr. Randall. When you...
Hoag? Did you say Hoag?
Yes, Mr. Randall. I want to apologize for my peremptory manner yesterday morning and to beg your indulgence. I trust that Mrs. Randall was not upset by my
By this time, Randall was sufficiently recovered from his first surprise to express himself. He did so juicily, using words and figures of speech picked up during years of association with the sort of characters that a private detective inevitably runs into. When he had finished, there was a gasp from the other end of the line, and then a dead silence. He was not satisfied. He wanted Hoag to speak so that he could interrupt him and continue the tirade.
Are you there, Hoag?
Yes.
I wanted to add this. Maybe you think it's a joke to catch a woman alone in a hallway and scare the daylights out of her. I don't. But I'm not going to turn you over to the police. No, indeed. Just as soon as Mrs. Randall gets well, I'm going to look you up myself, and then, God help you, Hoag, you'll need it.
There followed such a long silence that Randall was sure that his victim had hung up. But it seemed that Hoag was merely collecting his wits.
Mr. Randall, this is terrible.
You bet it is.
Do you mean to tell me that I accosted Mrs. Randall and frightened her?
You should know.
But I don't know. Truly, I don't.
He paused and then continued in an unsteady voice.
This is the sort of thing I have been afraid of, Mr. Randall. Afraid that I might discover that during my lapses of memory, I might have been doing terrible things. But to have harmed Mrs. Randall, she was so good to me, so kind to me. This is horrible.
You're telling me.
Hoag sighed as if we were tired beyond endurance.
Mr. Randall?
Randall did not answer.
Mr. Randall, there is no use in me deluding myself. There is only one thing to be done. You've got to turn me over to the police.
Huh?
I've known it ever since our last conversation. I thought about it all day yesterday, but I did not have the courage. I had hoped that I was through with my other personality, but today it happened again. The whole day is a blank, and I just came to myself this evening on getting home. Then I knew that I had to do something about it, so I called you to ask you to resume your investigations. But I never suspected that I could possibly have done anything to Mrs. Randall.
He seemed most convincingly overcome by shock at the idea.
When did this happen, Mr. Randall?
Randall found himself in a most bewildered state of mind. He was torn between the desire to climb through the phone and wring the neck of the man he held responsible for his wife's desperate condition, and the necessity for remaining where he was to care for her. In addition to that, he was bothered by the fact that Hoag refused to talk like a villain. While speaking with him, listening to his mild answers and his worried tones, it was difficult to maintain the conception of him as a horrid monster of the Jack the Ripper type, although he knew consciously that villains were often mild in manner. Therefore, his answer was merely factual.
9:30 in the morning, about.
Where was I at 9:30 this morning?
Not this morning, you so-and-so. Yesterday morning.
Yesterday morning? But that's not possible. Don't you remember? I was at home yesterday morning.
Of course I remember. And I saw you leave. Maybe you didn't know that.
He was not being very logical. The other events of the previous morning had convinced him that Hoag knew that they were shadowing him, but he was in no state of mind to be logical.
But you couldn't have seen me. Yesterday morning was the only morning, aside from my usual Wednesdays, on which I can be sure where I was. I was at home in my apartment. I didn't leave it until nearly 1 o'clock when I went to my club.
Why, that's a...
Wait a minute, Mr. Randall, please. I'm just as confused and upset about this as you are, but you've got to listen to me. You broke my routine, remember? And my other personality did not assert itself. After you left, I remained my proper self. That's why I had hopes that I was free at last.
The hell you did. What makes you think you did?
I know my own testimony doesn't count for much, but I wasn't alone. The cleaning woman arrived just after you left and was here all morning.
Damned funny I didn't see her go up.
She works in the building. She's the wife of the janitor. Her name is Mrs. Jenkins. Would you like to talk with her? I can probably locate her and get her on the line.
But
Randall was getting more and more confused and was beginning to realize that he was at a disadvantage.
I should never have discussed matters with Hoag at all. I should have simply saved him up until there was opportunity to take a crack at him. Potbury was right. Hoag was a slick and insidious character. Alibi indeed. Furthermore, I was becoming increasingly nervous and fretful over having stayed away from the bedroom as long as I had. Hoag must have had me on the phone at least 10 minutes. It was not possible to see into the bedroom from where I sat at the breakfast table.
no, I don't want to talk to her. You lie in circles.
I slammed the phone back into its cradle and hurried into the bedroom.
End of episode 7.